treatments, myths, and what the science is. It's almost time for the show. But first, I'm going to play my patrons video. I need to add, wait a second, I gotta pause this. The funky beats just want to keep on going. So I want to take a moment to thank my patrons. I need to add Mark to this, the Derp State, and Rhetoric and Discourse. I'm making a new patron video, so I want to take a moment to thank my awesome patrons. Hello and welcome to This Week in BS. I'm going to unmute my super awesome guests here. And we've got Lavender Lady, the Lavender Lady. I'm trying to unmute. There we go. Hello. And we also have Amanda from Brief Brain Facts joining us. Again, I feel like she just lives here. It's actually quite nice. You're welcome to my refrigerator, Amanda.
Well, thanks. I will actually take you up on that offer.
I know you've been hungry, and so she's gonna eat her dinner. See, she's so awesome. She's like, I'm gonna be copping on your show. I'm gonna be eating. She's a multitasker, so I really think that's awesome. So today we're gonna talk about gender dysphoria in children. There's been so much that I've seen across social media, as well as what I've found in just generalized topics. There's much more awareness that's happening, especially with the trans community. And so to kind of help put things into perspective, having been an educator of children myself, Amanda's a neuroscientist, so she can talk a little bit about neuroplasticity. And we have the Lavender Lady, who is a trans lady, and so she's going to share a bit of her story to kind of give us a little bit of perspective of what it's been like in the past being a trans kid versus nowadays. So how about we start with you? Do you want me to call you the Lavender Lady, or do you want me to call you Diana?
Diana's just fine. It's amazing that around here in the Pittsburgh area, for some reason, everybody wants to call me Diane, but they did that to my ex as well. My ex's name was Melody. And
okay.
everyone wanted to call her Melanie.
Oh,
so
gosh,
no.
they want to call me Melon D. They put an N in and a DY. I'm like, Melon D, like a melon with a DY at the end. I'm like, I don't know.
Oh, for the love of Saint Kulik, I don't know. And then, of course, there are those stubborn people who always want to call me Di.
Di?
Like, yeah, as in Diana Spencer.
Oh, Diana. Okay, Diana Spencer. Or, Lady Di.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, okay, I'm getting used to it, but it still grates on my nerves from time to time. But,
yeah, I understand.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not young. I am in my early 60s.
Okay.
I knew about being different maybe 50 years ago, maybe 55 years ago. when you just didn't see any of this out there. You didn't talk about it, especially with the parents I had who thought everything was sexual and couldn't say, sex, the word, and anything above a whisper.
There's a lot of stigma with that at the time.
Oh, absolutely. So number one, I'm having a hard time knowing what this is all about because I know I'm not like the other boys. And I'm getting shit for it. I'm getting bullied. I'm getting poked and prodded and everything else for the emotional nature that I had, easy to cry, very sensitive, that sort of thing. And I'm saying, why? And I can remember being maybe about 10 years old or so at one point. One of the few times I got to be home alone, sitting there crying and thinking, am I like Christine Jorgensen? And what the hell do I do if I am?
Can you give us a little bit of background on Christine Jorgensen, just for our viewers who may not be familiar with that person?
She was the first public transsexual, first person to go public. She was George Jorgensen, living in New York, I believe. Went to Sweden, I think, to get a genital operation, which was nothing like the surgeries that are available now. It was a very crude surgery at the time.
Yeah. As surgery has tended to be historically. So.
Yeah. But yeah, she hit the newspapers, and it was a whole bombshell and everything. And I was a lucky kid in the sense that I was actually reading newspapers, et cetera. Now, sure, Christine Jorgensen, that was the 50s. And I'm talking about mid-60s here. But still, reading the histories, reading the books, that sort of thing. I knew who and what she was. I still didn't know if there was a name associated with who and what I was. But I knew that it was kind of like her, or at least what I had heard about her. And the first thing was, okay, I can't say anything to anyone about this. I would really, really like to be able to grow up as the girl I am. But who do I talk to? Number one, there's nobody to talk to. It wasn't a medical thing at the time. And when it was a medical thing, you could find yourself losing everything. I mean, let's think of Lynn Conway. This was a computer scientist who worked at IBM, responsible for developing one of the newest computer architectures of the time. I think it was LSI, but I'm not sure. But when she wanted to have the surgeries to transition, etc., she went ahead and did this. And the rumor is that CEO Tom Watson was the one who said, okay, you don't have a job anymore. She basically had to start all over again. And happily she was able to, until she had a professorship at the University of Michigan. But it was decades of hard work and hiding. That was the other thing, that she had to fly stealth. No one could know about her past because she'd be, back to square one again, starting all over. And that's basically the way I kind of felt too. I knew I was going to be a 10-year-old on the street if I said, hey, Mom, hey, Dad, I'm a girl. So there's all the waiting. Meanwhile, there's this thing called puberty that kind of rears its ugly head and affects changes that are, number one, undesired, and number two, rather permanent. I've joked around about one of them, where a voice like this just doesn't go very well with a rack the size of a city bus. And then the facial hair once and the body hair, once that venereal hair starts growing, it doesn't stop, man. You're
Yeah.
talking maybe, some of us girls will pay $60,000 for the necessary electrolysis
Right.
to,
See,
you know,
that's one of those things. Once that gene is activated for that particular cell, it just keeps going. So you
yeah.
have, yeah. So you have to essentially just stunt the ability to grow the hair. Um,
And then in terms of a social transition too,
mm,
I'm thinking as I'm looking back, okay, I'm looking at two sides of the same
mm,
coin here. First of all, I'm looking back and I'm thinking, okay, maybe it would have been a lot easier for the social transition
mm,
had everyone seen a girl from day one.
mm,
Um, you know, okay, let's say that I would have chosen the name Diana at the time. Okay, I'm growing up, I'm going to school as Diana, and everybody knows Diana. There's no big change for them
right.
that they're getting all squirrely about. That would have been a lot easier, kids, than affecting a sudden change,
Mm,
in someone that everybody has known for years and years. But then the other side of the coin, too, I would have been growing up lesbian.
yeah.
And that at that time wasn't all that well accepted either.
Yeah.
So,
You were growing up at a very volatile time.
yes.
You had slut shaming, you had civil rights things going on. You still had sexual harassment for being a woman in the job
Oh, yeah.
place. So you had all of these societal norms that are in no way normal
Hmm.
whatsoever and quite oppressive mentality. So I imagine being a kid, being brought up in a world like that, and looking in the mirror and say, I see a girl, I don't see a boy. That had to, that, I mean, I can't imagine what that's like because I don't see, well, I do have a bit of body dysphoria. I think everybody in some way has things that they see that stick out, like, I don't like this. But that's not the same thing at all. We're talking about your entire identity. So,
Yeah.
how soon? So you felt like maybe when you're like early teens, that's when you were like, okay, I'm still seeing a girl here. Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can remember, I'm in middle school, if I remember correctly, and
Mm-hmm,
wishing that I could have a toggle switch going.
mm-hmm,
Excuse me. I quit smoking 9 months ago and I'm still clearing my lungs out. Where I could throw the toggle to girl to be okay, who and what I am, and live my life that way, and then throw the toggle to boy when I had to appease everybody
mm-hmm,
else, family especially, so they
mm-hmm.
didn't, so I could be that girl, but not around them. And
Right.
we're talking middle school here, so
Mm-hmm,
11, 12, that sort of thing. So I already had that thing going, and I was already, I mean, even before I knew the word transgendered or transsexual,
mm-hmm,
I'm already thinking, I wish I could have some sort of procedure
mm-hmm.
the way Jorgensen did, or that sort of thing, that I could transform my physiology, my body, that sort of thing, to what it was supposed to have been.
Okay.
Um,
Well, first, let me say thank you for sharing your story with us. I can't, and I honestly say this, I know I cannot fully understand what it is that you went through, but I certainly do respect, and, you have my empathy.
oh,
Um,
danke schön.
and so I think anybody who feels like they're in the wrong body, that's got to be pretty traumatizing. So let me toss this over to Amanda. Amanda,
Absolute.
what goes on? What I mean, and I don't. I know in regard to the neuroscience, when you're dealing with that kind of trauma, and I imagine when you're already trying to learn about yourself and you're trying to grow, and having been an educator, the stuff that I'm trained in to actually recognize and try to deal with, what goes on with the brain when you're dealing with, trying to sort out your identity, but at the same time, all of the different trauma that can come from the outside world, because we already know bullying alters DNA. We already know that. And it can actually lead to anxiety and depression and other things that manifest within a child. What do you think about all of this?
Can I ask a question real fast?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Go for it.
So, what's her name? Jorgensen? Is that?
Oh,
Diane.
Kristen Jorgensen.
Yeah,
Jorgensen?
Kristen Jorgensen.
Yeah.
How was she received by the public when she first, emerged as going through a transitionary phase and then woman? How did the public view her?
She was a big newspaper sensation when she first came back to the U.S. from Sweden, but after that, it was a very, very hard life for her. Was not able to fit into standard society very well. So it was basically that she was in niche areas. I think she did shows. I don't think she ever did porn. But yeah, it's not that she could be a business executive or anything like that, at least not until later.
Okay. So to answer your question, Mel, so what we do understand about trauma, especially from an early age, we're going to assume that this is a pretty traumatic experience to have to go through, to have to not conform with what society expects of you. You're going to experience a lot of shame, doubt, a lot of harassment in various capacities. And it could even be by the people that should love you the most, by your family, and should accept you, right? And so that not having a familial system or some system in which to go to when you're facing these types of obstacles puts an additional burden on the person that's experiencing this. So trauma in the brain at a very young age can last a lifetime. Your brain's very vulnerable during childhood, adolescence, and puberty. During these stages, there's time periods where you basically lose brain cells and brain connections, and there's two major time points that happens before you're the age of 25. And so it's basically structuring your brain to basically expect for certain situations or certain, I guess, things that would happen during based off of your life, your lived experience. And so if that happens and your synapses and all these things get basically accustomed to living under these conditions, it's going to expect that for the rest of your life. And so it could, as you mentioned, it could lead to a lot of psychopathologies like depression and anxiety for sure. And these things are lifetime situations. They're not curable. You have to, manage them throughout your life. It's having a chronic illness at that point. And so basically what society is inflicting on an individual is a lifetime of illness at that point. And unfortunately, people don't view it that way. They just view it as them being abnormal, and they should just somehow get used to it. But there's many different societies throughout the world that don't even have a defined gender. They don't see it as so binary. They see gender fluidity. This is a very Western type of concept for it to be very binary. You're either male or female, and there's no room for deviations. And I would say that this used to be quite abnormal view of thinking, considering the vast before imperialism and things like that, other societies didn't think about it that way. It's unfortunate.
It is something that I actually was looking up and actually had a talk with about a year ago. It was a little over a year ago, with a therapist. She works exclusively with LGBTQIA individuals, and one thing that she works a lot with, it has to do with trauma regarding transgender individuals. The rate of suicide, particularly in children and adolescents, is 32 to 50%. Their risk for suicide is 32 to 50%. And so I can throw these links into the description. I've been digging in a bit.
A study recently, but it was using Canadian youth, and it was about 14%, which is still really high.
That's still pretty high, yes.
Yeah.
So I've been digging in, and it's really hard to find stuff within the U.S. as far as actively, regularly used type of treatments for individuals prior to the age of 16. And so there are some other countries, like Dutch countries and the UK, that have a pretty well established way that they go through and work with children, particularly children as young as 9, trying to help them kind of sort out their gender. Now, the American Pediatrics Association, the APA, they are becoming more vocal about the fact that we do have transgender children, adolescents. They say it's approximately 0.7% of the population tends to have gender dysphoria in children. But the fact is they don't have adequate access to health care, therapy, all of these different things. And so they are urging that that pediatricians become more aware and more involved in just even the health care, that they don't exhibit any kind of bias towards these children, but they give them a safe space to kind of explore their gender identity because of the suicide rate alone. So that's something that's exceedingly important that I think our country is kind of lacking in.
Well, one thing to note about that too is that, if they don't get treatment to, sort those things out, to identify, to basically have a safe space during childhood and adolescence, they're less likely to, as adults, because of the U.S. healthcare system as well. I mean, it's almost a systemic issue that, they're likely to not have healthcare as adults. And so pediatricians are key to providing that service to these people that are likely to lose their health care when they age out of the system, because at least children are somewhat more covered than adults in the United States. Hopefully this will change, and I think people are becoming more cognizant of that particular issue, but it's all related. It's all very related. And so the earlier that this can get addressed, and for psychological purposes, for biological purposes, the better, right?
Right. No, I completely agree. One of the things that I really liked, there was a particular paper that I read in the British Medical Journal, and I think I sent it to you, about the ways that they go about. There's like a whole process in handling gender dysphoria. They get the parents involved. There's a team of experts, and they start to assess the child over the course of 6 months. They undergo psychometric testing. They do bone density analysis. They do radiological scans. They check to see if this is manifesting because of certain. They even check their DNA, look for particular genes that they think is associated with the expression of gender dysphoria. But they rule out everything. They go through a medical process, and then they go and look at the history of the child. And the sooner that they're able to do that, then they get together, they look at all the data, and they go, okay, how old is the child? And then they have the child undergo therapy to allow the child an opportunity to explore their gender. And sometimes it's not that they think they're the complete opposite gender, but they might be gender non-conforming. They might be gender fluid. They might be these other things. They don't necessarily subscribe to this particular gender. And that's something that I think is really kind of awesome, especially with the British model, because then they'll go, okay, then they'll introduce the puberty suppressing hormones just to allow the child a bit more time before puberty kicks in, to allow them to kind of think about it. And then once they've undergone that for a few years and they are fully committed to being the opposite gender, then they'll start the cross-sex hormones. Now in the U.S., they don't use a whole lot of the puberty suppressing early puberty medication, because it's still under so much observation. They don't quite know. It's still experimental. but they do allow the cross-sex hormones once they get to the age of 16. But then I went digging for so much stuff, and it's just almost absent in the US from what I could find.
Yeah, that's right. If I may, with the British model, that is the sort of thing I'd really love to see in practice everywhere, where you have the chance to explore, as you put it, and think and reflect. And am I really the boy I think I am, or am I really the girl I think I am? And this is totally in the face of the, especially religious types, where I'm hearing them go on about the rate of transition regret, which, okay, is like virtually nil, people. It does exist, but it's a lot less than some people would have you think it is. Not everybody is Walt Heyer, but
Right.
you do get that chance as a kid to really look at this and say, okay, is this what I'm about? The only reason I got a chance to reflect and that sort of thing was because I had to wait so freaking long. I had to wait 50 years,
Right.
well, closer to 40 to transition. I was 52 when I finally undertook my and I'd been thinking about that for most of a half a century, but it was late in life to do the transitioning. I wish I could have been thinking about it when I was exploring back when I was 10 or 11 years old. It would have been a lot nicer. And for these kids now, I'm thinking it would be a lot nicer. I'm thinking it would be a lot better for them.
And some of the things that I've read in regard to children that are identifying as something other than, and I've seen it called the birth gender, the natal gender, the assigned gender, at birth assigned gender. One of the things that is extremely important is a support network, including family and parents. That is exceedingly important, especially when you're dealing with a child who does not understand what's happening to them. But in addition to that, they need to be able to express, this is how I'm feeling. And so the support network that children have lowers the suicide risk. It lowers the incidence from what I've read. It lowers the risk of incidents of mental illness associated with depression and anxiety and that sort of thing.
And so does people out there in society not treating us like abominations.
Right.
You've got to remember that the folks that really hate transies like me, I'll use that term just in, I'll use it so you don't have to. You can't hurt me with it, okay? Not you, them out there.
Right.
Where was I with this? But it's the
societal impact is still there, and it's harmful.
If they could just leave us alone, the suicide rate, the self-harm rate would be a lot less all by itself just because of that.
Right. Okay, so here's a question that's probably a good one for Amanda. Winkle the Burning Bro gave $5 super chat. Thank you, dude. He said, how did societies previously treat gender non-binary? How far back we talk in ancient times? Examples. I know in India they have multiple genders. They actually have one that they're transgender. They're men who identify as women. They are invited to weddings because they're considered good luck. But there tends to be also a high rate of rape of some of these individuals. So, I don't know. Amanda, do you have any other ideas on cultures and...
Yeah. So I don't know if this was a something that was afforded to the privileged at the time, but there was an Egyptian pharaoh who was a woman, and she, they would always configure her, like in the monuments they made to her, for her. They configured her with, her breasts and hips and things like that. But she would wear a beard, essentially. And a beard in that culture was kind of a power, way to define power. And she always wore the beard, and it didn't seem like she got a lot of pushback for that behavior. Now, was this something that was afforded to the peasant class? There's no way to know that from what is understood about that culture right now, or for what has been found, since a lot of the iconography and things like that were always of the privileged class. But she was definitely something that, archaeologists were like, wow, this is odd. But she was one of the greatest pharaohs who had lived at that time and since, actually. And so that's just one example of like a prominent culture that allowed some sort of flexibility there. As far as of course, it's hard to say for certain. But I don't remember her name, actually. Does anybody remember who she was? The pharaoh?
Let's see. Maybe I can pull it up on my supercomputer.
I don't have the name in my brain cells. No, I know what you're talking about.
You know who I'm talking about.
Let me see if I can find them really quickly. Okay, so let's see. Akhenaten. Is that
that was a guy? He was the one that sort of directed Egypt toward monotheism for a while.
I don't know how to pronounce it. Hatshepsut or something like that. Does she sound familiar?
I think so.
I think it was her.
Goodness. Yeah. Okay. There's one named Akhenaten, may have been transgender, because of the feminine features.
And there was Tutankhamun too, that they thought was some sort of, there was indication that he may have been transgender as well.
That's pretty interesting. And the thing is there was so much associated with being a god when it came to being pharaoh. They were allowed to do lots of different things that probably the standard, and it's Hatshepsut is
something.
Okay,
it's a hard one to pronounce.
I don't say words so great sometimes. I have a hard time. And so Mr. Shadow Kitty says the Native Americans had the bird Dosh. They were revered as being spiritually gifted. So that's pretty interesting. So it's it's weird. It's kind of interesting to kind of sit here and think, okay, so here we are, Western society that's supposed to be progressive and embracing knowledge, but here we are kind of in this we have what I would say a march towards willful ignorance and anti-intellectualism, but we're not just marching anymore. It seems like we're running really fast towards anti-intellectualism.
Well, this was a concerted, at least in the United States, this was a concerted effort by a certain group of people that definitely wanted people to not develop some sort of progressive behaviors and ideologies so that they could maintain power. A good way to do that was to stifle education and to defund it. And because if you have a more educated citizenry, you have a more empowered citizenry. And arguably, they end up being a lot more progressive, too. And Americans, you have to remember, they do lean left, despite what all the media might tell you.
Right.
You break it down issue by issue, they do.
Yeah.
But interestingly, that is not reflected in the political atmosphere at all. And it's unfortunate, of course.
I do find it interesting that in regard to politics, the last president that we had that was an actual scientist was Thomas Jefferson.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
That, and even that he was a slave owner, he was one of the founding fathers. I mean, so he wasn't like, he was a person of his time, yes, but that was literally the last scientist that we've had in office. Was Thomas
Well, I mean,
Jefferson.
it just seems intentional at that point. I mean, they don't want people to be smart.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you.
The closest we came in the 20th century, I think, would be Jimmy Carter, right? He was an engineer.
Yeah, he was an engineer. Actually, I do kind of like Jimmy Carter. He still works with Habitat for Humanity and is building homes. So, I mean, he's still out there in the throes of it. Is he like almost 900 years old now? Just out there with a hammer.
He's well over 90.
He's like, yeah, he's got to be. And he's out there in the heat, building houses, affordable housing so people can own their homes. Yeah, that's a president right there.
Really lost our way as a society. I mean, if there's so many cultures around the world that does accept some sort of gender fluidity, it would seem like they eventually would get more easily to the place of complete gender fluidity, as opposed to, I think there's what's the city in South America somewhere where they accept a third gender, but it's usually always a female gender.
Yeah.
Are you guys familiar with that?
Not right off the top of my head.
Are you speaking of the one?
I read all the science. I didn't think about the cultural history.
Are you speaking of the one? I think it's a sort of gender where the child appears to be a girl, but at puberty begins developing as a boy.
No. I'm thinking about where it's the reverse, where they tend to be male, but then it's accepted that if they, develop more like around puberty, want to kind of transition to female, it's accepted as a society.
Okay,
they end up becoming like caregivers and things like that.
Yeah, okay, this is something totally different to what I remember. Because the one I'm thinking of, there was not a lack of, but a less amount of a certain enzyme that performed conversion of.
Are you talking about androgen?
Something to testosterone, and then
yes, that's androgen and sensitivity.
And then the genitalia was rather ambiguous, that sort of thing. But when you hit the puberty, and everything really started going into overdrive, that overcame whatever was lacking for the child. And then now you've got a basically normal male development.
Oh, okay. I'm not certain. I know there's androgen insensitivity, which is how we managed to get people that have a Y chromosome but develop as female characteristics.
It's because they have two X chromosomes, right?
Well, you can have an X chromosome and a Y chromosome, but you can still actually develop as a female because if your cells lack the receptor for testosterone,
you got it.
The default is female. The default is female. See, that's the thing that a lot of people don't understand. Most of what's on the Y chromosome is don't be a girl. That's pretty much the genetic code. No. Don't be a girl. And so if you lack the receptors on your cells to receive testosterone, you can have it all in your blood. You can have a presence, the actual levels of testosterone for a male, but you can actually develop as a woman with external characters. You even have internal testes, but you can still develop external characteristics, breasts. You'll grow as a body because nature's default is female.
There was a case of that, and he or she, I don't know how they ended up identifying later on, but went through their entire childhood thinking that she was a girl, went through the teenage years thinking she was a girl, until she didn't develop a period, essentially. And they went to the doctor and found that she had testes that did not descend, and that's the condition that she had. But I think she probably ended up being identifying as a female because she felt comfortable as a female. But it's very interesting how that happens, and even our biology. If you see the argument against trans people a lot of the time that it's unnatural. That's one of the arguments. But you see even in our biology, how there's cases where, okay, so how do you account for this that happened that originated on its own naturally? And usually they don't have an answer to that. It's unfortunate.
The one I didn't know about until recently was XX males, where a section of the Y chromosome containing SRY, the masculine determining area of the Y chromosome translocates to an X.
Yep.
And then you have two X chromosomes, but you still got a male. And it actually, and this flies in the face of people
two X chromosomes means a lady. No, there's a whole section. Maybe I need to do a show just on intersex, because you can have portions of a chromosome hop off of one and end up on another. This is why you can end up with Down syndrome, but not actually have another, it's trisomy 21, 3 copies of 21. You can have a copy of 21 hop onto another chromosome. So you end up with your 2 copies of 21, but you'll have a third somewhere else on one of your other chromosomes. And you still end up with Down syndrome. But when they do your karyotype, which is where they take your DNA and then they go through and they look at all the chromosomes and say, okay, let's see how many of each we've got. And they're like, well, there's only 2 21s here. Oh, wait, number 13. This is oddly long. Why is 13 so much longer? Oh, that must be where the extra 21 is. But people don't understand that. Genetics is so weird. You can have entire chromosomes go missing. You can have some leave one and hop onto another in translocation, as you were mentioning, a part of the SRY, part of the Y chromosome hopping over onto an X. And if that's activated, then that means all of the female development is completely shut down. You only need 1 copy of that particular gene to shut down female development completely. Yeah. So it's pretty interesting that we as a society cannot accept that weird stuff happens in genetics. We have spooky quantum physics. Well, we got spooky weird genetics where you can have stuff break off here, end up somewhere else, and then 2 X chromosomes, but you have it.
It's almost as if it's not a good argument to utilize that's not biologically sound, like trans people. Their gender identity isn't biologically based or sound. And then you go to the biological examples, and it's all sorts of fucked up.
Oh my goodness! And so it makes me nuts, because I sit there and people are like, "Well, biologically they're female. Well, they have 2 X chromosomes, but they have testes. Please explain that to me." So you can't just you have genetic sex, yes, but you can be genetically male, genetically female, and your body doesn't even develop that way.
And let's remember, too, that a lot of the hardware that goes into gender is not even on the X or the Y chromosomes. It's on, what's the word I'm looking for? Somatic chromosomes. And in that sense...
So it's not on the sex chromosomes. It's on the other. So you have your X and Y and your X and X. Those are your sex chromosomes. And then your somatic, all that means is body chromosomes. So it's the stuff that handles all of your other bodily function, your brain development, your heart development, all of that stuff. It's not the don't be a girl or be a girl chromosome.
Yeah, it's everybody gets this stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, I really wish that people would stop looking at, okay, if you want to call it an anomaly, go ahead and call it an anomaly. But people like me, or people like the CIS girls, or the other intersex things, as these kids humiliating their families or their peers or whatever it is. That's what I got when I finally had to come out, because I was already in transition, etc. It's like, hey mom, hey dad, no, I've got to tell you something. I'm a girl, and what I heard was, you humiliate us, and then they didn't speak to me since then. If people would quit that, if they would at least be interested in, okay, you say this, okay, why?
Yeah.
What's it all about? Let's have I want to learn.
It really
so much better.
It really bugs me because, again, having been an educator of children in around the pre-puberty, because it was I'm licensed to teach 7th the 12th grade, so middle school and high school, having had experience with said individuals, they are already having a hard time figuring out who they are. Okay. They, and I actually, as an aside, I used to DJ. So I've DJ'd high school and middle school dances. They have no idea how to talk to each other. They have no idea what they're doing. And so you throw in the fact they don't know who they are anyway. And then they have no idea if they're a boy or girl or how they feel about that, and then you have parents who are like, oh, you're just wrong. It makes me absolutely angry because kids can, and people like, well, kids can't actually understand, who they are. Well, to a degree, they are trying to figure out how to be who they are, but they need a space to do that. There was somebody on Twitter who was equating a child trying to talk about their gender as being like a pirate. And
I know the Twitter war you're talking about.
Yes, I don't want to. I don't want to get too much into that.
Right.
But there's a flaw in that argument. Children can identify their gender at the age of 3. They start to understand, I am a girl, I am a boy. And they kind of start going through, I'm interested in these things. I'm interested in these things. I'm interested in hanging out with the girls, or I'm interested in hanging out with the boys. They can start to gender identify as early as 3. Now, the brain for a child, and Amanda, you can back me up on that, by the time that they're 3, their brain is fully developed for childhood. But it's not developed for adulthood until they're 25. And so it's important to allow the child to explore that space and go, okay, well, maybe I don't, and they can change their mind. They can absolutely change, and you can change your mind as you get older. But the thing that's important to note here, especially with those hormones, from what I've read and what the FDA has had to say, how it's gone over in Dutch countries, how it's gone over in the UK, that the GnRH, the gonadotropic suppressor hormone that stops them from undergoing puberty, in most cases, if not, it's a large percentage, it's reversible. And eventually, they're probably going to go through that process anyway. But slowing it down gives them an opportunity to think, okay, do I want to do this? Because sometimes they might not be, oh, okay, so I'm a boy and I really think I'm a girl. Sometimes as they get older and they mature, they might be gender non-conforming or gender fluid. But that's not the point. The point is you're giving them an opportunity to not have all of these secondary characteristics expressed while they're trying to sort out who they are, which is traumatic in itself.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think? What do you think, Diana? And then I'll ask Amanda what her thoughts are on that.
Okay, as in, taking the time out and taking the reflection and letting to explore, that sort of thing. Yeah, that's the whole idea behind this, and I would like to see more of it. Did I say it here, or did I say it to you before we went live? There are the cases of transition regret that do exist, and as I say, they're not anywhere near as prevalent as John MacArthur or Ken Ham would have you believe, but they do exist. And the whole idea, at least, of giving somebody time to reflect and say, is this really what I am? Is this really what I want? Is to reduce the chance of that regret, because that once you get to the point of transition regret, it's usually irreversible and you're screwed for the rest of your life. So, okay, the 9-year-old, the 8-year-old, whatever it is, has that chance that said, hey, mom, hey, dad, I'm a girl. Okay, let's just halt the whole puberty thing for the moment. Let's let you live that life and see what you think of it while you're going through with the gender counseling, because that exists as well.
Yes,
to where you're talking with somebody who has a professional knowledge of this sort of thing and can direct the lines of questioning and sort of ask the right questions and look for the answers, that sort of thing. That's what I want to see for everybody, really, who who thinks of this sort of thing, and to not have to spend a half century reflecting simply because you cannot have any of it. Yeah, better earlier than ever, than later.
So what do you think about all this, Amanda?
So puberty can be a very complicated time for so many people. That can actually be traumatic in and of itself, unfortunately. I don't think we deal with puberty very well in our society to begin with. And if for some reason we lived in a better world where we did, I feel like there would be an easier, like, I don't think you would have to necessarily stop the process of puberty. You would just figure out where, if they wanted to transition, at a later age, and how to get them to transition. So I'm conflicted, to be perfectly honest, as far as completely just stopping the whole process. Because I'm not sure how much time they would need to settle and figure out. But of course, I don't live that experience, so I think that would be up to them to figure out. But I do want to note that it is a traumatic time period for everybody, and we should handle it better. And that way, when there are kind of exceptions to the rule, which would be, the trans people would be kind of exceptions, I suppose, they would also feel comfortable going through some sort of that time period too, and then figuring out where they needed to be at the end of it. But yeah, so I think that's for them and their parents to decide, to be perfectly honest. What I don't want to see happen is for somebody to legislate that and to determine that it isn't for the parent and the child to make that, and their doctor to make that decision, that in fact it is the decision of lawmakers. I think that is grotesque, and it's none of their business. At the end of the day, it's not. So that's where I am on that process myself.
I agree with that. I think, and this is also still kind of a budding area of science where they're trying to learn more about it, and see, that there's not a lot of information on the long-term implications of slowing puberty in the beginning. I think most puberty onset happens to be around 11 or 12. So if they're able, maybe around there, I don't know. It's hard to say, especially as a fact with certain foods, like certain types of meats, like certain beefs have extra hormones in it.
Right.
We're still susceptible to that. So it could be even earlier. I think.
Yes. There's something.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think it's really important for parents. Okay, so this is my advice for parents. It's important to pay attention to your child. And if your child says, I think I'm a girl and they're a boy, or they say, I think I'm a boy and they're a girl, it's important to get them to a gender therapist, talk to the pediatrician, start talking to experts about what the current science is, and give your child a space to explore that. It doesn't mean, because gender they could be gender fluid, they could be gender nonconforming, they could be non-binary, they could be lots of different things. But the sooner you identify and you allow your child a space to kind of start trying to figure it out, they might figure it out a bit sooner. And then, if they need a bit more time to get through it, implement the slowing of the puberty. Implement the slowing of the puberty if they need a bit more time. Once they hit 16, what the American Pediatrics starts saying is the cross-sex hormones, and then they can commit to it. Sometimes they decide that the gender dysphoria tends to settle itself out by the end of puberty. Sometimes that happens, but just let your child be your child for a bit. It's hard enough being a kid in this world.
And if you think about it, because I did read some studies back a while ago, so I don't know about the updated information about how puberty is happening earlier. in children. And so slowing it down could potentially just put them at where we actually used to experience puberty anyways. So that's something too.
I do want to mention that gender dysphoria for children and for adults is mentioned in the DSM-5. That's the diagnostic. I forget what the S is for mental disorders.
Diagnostic Statistical Manual.
Diagnostics. Thank you, Amanda. This is why I have you here. You are awesome for that. And the reason why it's there is not because it's seen as a disorder, but because of the emotional issues that are associated with trying to sort out who you are and the societal impact.
It's also included in the DSM because of insurance companies, so that people can get treatment, because insurance companies are not likely to treat anybody unless there's an official diagnosis. And so that helps add to that, so that they can get hormone treatment if they so desire.
Because otherwise, then it would be considered an elective type of procedure.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the unfortunate thing about the way the healthcare system works, is that you need that diagnosis to get the treatment, because it pisses off a lot of trans folk, where they say, okay, they're calling us disordered, they're calling us broken, and it's not like that at all, and they're not hearing it. And it's
well, it's because there's precedence there, right? Where the DSM used to back in the 70s, and they removed it for DSM-4, where being homosexual was considered a disorder. And that's why I think that's why there's that feeling in the community regarding mental health and what's defined in the DSM. And so that could be why they're thinking that initially. But of course, they've revised it and excluded that and included gender dysphoria as a means to say that this is the emotional reactivity to it. And also, here you go, insurance companies.
Something... Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say something that I didn't get a chance to really dive in and look at so much is I don't think people quite understand how that can also affect a child in the educational sense. Yeah. So if they have social issues, I know, for instance, Asperger's is listed on the spectrum as one of the things that's protected under learning disabilities. Not so much that a person has a hard time learning in a classroom, but that teachers have to address the fact these children don't do well in social situations. So something that I think I'm going to kind of do on the side and see, what about gender dysphoria? How does that play a role in a child's education? Because if it affects their education, having to deal with the societal issues in the classes around them, that might end up being protected under IDEA, which is the Disability Education Act. And so they could, if that's protected under that, if there's enough of an educational issue, I need to double check that, because it's constantly updating, and the person in charge of education right now ain't so great. So
you noticed.
Oh my gosh. They actually deleted the pamphlets and brochures for IDEA on the frequently asked questions and that sort of thing.
They did,
off of the education website.
Yeah.
So parents don't know what their rights are. They, not in the easy to read thing. They're gonna have to dig down or read the entire packet, which is pretty freaking thick, that they get when they go to the meetings about renewing their child's IEP, which is their intervention education plan. And so, but see, that's the thing. They have psychologists, the teachers have input on how the child is doing, what's going on with that. So if that were a particularly protected type of thing, I need to check into that. I think I'm going to. Because if gender dysphoria is considered an emotional type of thing, that clearly would probably affect their education. And that might be considered
affecting it in some capacity.
Right. So if Asperger's is there, where a child has a hard time understanding nonverbal communication and doesn't react with peers so well, you might have the same kind of similar issue associated with gender dysphoria. So I'm going to dig into that and see if maybe there needs to be something added to that to help those kids actually get an education when having to deal with everything else. Because we know bullying does change the genetic code in a kid. Their genes change. And then
Yeah.
they are more prone to developing anxiety and that sort of thing down the road. So
It's interesting, Mel, that when you brought up the word puberty, it came to my mind, something I don't often think of, but it's out there. My window for getting treatment as a transgender kid would have been very, very narrow because I had a very early puberty.
mm,
So you would have had to have jumped on that with me. It's really weird when I was the only one in the class singing baritone at the age of 10.
yeah.
So that's already totally screwed. And then not only that, what I'm dealing with, trying to, it's like I am this, but they don't want me to be that. This is why it's really, really important to pay attention to the kid and to really look into what the kid wants to look into.
I agree. Aaron A says a friend of mine is non-binary and still hasn't come out to many liberal friends for fear of judgment. Even some liberal people often see gay lesbian only. That's a shame.
That's unfortunate, but it's true.
And thank you for the $5 super chat, Aaron. I appreciate that. I'm trying to catch up on some of the chat to see if I can find any questions. We've had a very riveting discussion, and we're like at an hour now. So let's see. I'm trying to find if anybody has any questions. Please feel free to hop in and ask me, Diana, or Amanda.
Can I just mention some interesting brain things real fast?
Sure, absolutely. Oh, and please subscribe to Lavender Lady and Amanda. I've got their links to their channel in the description. They're amazing. Check out the wonderful stuff that they do. It's great. Go for it, Amanda.
So what the literature suggests about people that identify as trans, and this has also been seen at least in youth, in adolescence, is that kind of their brains, the way that they activate the activation patterns, and also like structural differences, because there's some slight structural differences between hetero male and hetero female brains, or normative brains in those regards. And it seems like those that identify with their specific gender, their brains are more like the gender in which they identify. So they may be biologically male, but if they identify as female, their brain looks female. And that was just some slight thing that I wanted to just add to the discussion. I think that's really a very interesting thing. They don't know right now if there's if this same effect is seen in very young children, but this effect is seen in adolescents and older.
Oh goodness. And see, that's kind of interesting and amazing. Oh, go ahead, Lavender Lady.
It's unfortunate that the only test cases I know of as far as brain structure go are in adult people, adult transsexuals. I'd really like to know how that works with the kids, because I wanted to ask you how much of the literature, Amanda, you've been looking into, because really all I've been seeing since '95 is coming offshore, usually out of the Netherlands, and I don't know how much follow-up there's been done on the original research that, we've got the BSTC, that it differs from the four differences: cis male, cis female, trans male, trans female, and I think they even controlled for heterosexual and homosexual. But I haven't seen much beyond that. I haven't looked really. Have you seen any much since '95 that's either confirmed what Svab and Zhu originally found or cast doubt on it?
So Yes, there was a study in 2018 that was conducted, and this was the one that used children and adolescents, I believe.
Oh boy.
There was one that specifically did use children. I don't remember if this was 2013 or 2018, to be perfectly honest, but these are very much more recent than the 95 studies that did find the same things. They're still out of the Netherlands and Spain. And so I think it's probably around the same lab or group of researchers, most likely. But yeah, it did confirm the original findings, but they're using definitely different age groups and different, people populations. As far as longitudinal studies are concerned, I'm not sure about the tracking a child through adulthood. I don't know about that.
I don't know that any of those have ever been done. It would be kind of difficult to conduct something like that, would it not?
It's always difficult to do.
You've got to get the test population, and then you've got to follow that test population for a period of, say, a decade and a half or 2 decades. Yeah.
A lifetime, essentially. Sometimes, and it's difficult to do those in human research.
And I just wish that we could put that into the consciousness of some of the people, like at Catholic Answers or at evangelical parishes, that sort of thing, with no, just this little brain difference doesn't mean anything. No, it means everything, jackass.
Right. But I'm going to throw a little wrench here, that the studies that did find these differences between just cis male and female brains may have been flawed. There was a new study that came out that basically said, well, sex differences don't exist in the brain. And so, but it's the only one of its kind. And obviously it needs to be followed up with. And we also need to take into account all the other studies that kind of have sprung from it, finding kind of very similar things.
I had read a thing about the brain is more of a mosaic. And that's not really male or female. It's a mixture of both that manifest in different portions. So,
but there's some indication that like the cortical area on the right hemisphere is not as thick in men as it is in women, or something along those lines.
And I've seen that often used as a reason to say that women can't do a thing as well as men because their brain is different. And I'm like, I tend to see that type of science misused to promote.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't indicate that there's any functional differences, and that's something that does need to be pointed out. It doesn't mean that they're not going to be able to conduct some sort of task or skill because they have less cortical density over in this area of the brain versus this area of the brain. That's not what that's implying at all, because a lot of these brain tests don't correspond with any type of activity whatsoever. They're just looking at differences in the brain's thickness, for instance.
Yeah.
And they're not making a judgment on activity. And there's a stupid motorcycle here, and I hope you guys can't hear it.
It's okay. I'm going to take a moment to, because Jen in the chat had said that she transitioned from male to female in 1981. So that's awesome. I'm so glad you're doing all right, Jen, and you're living the life you want to live. So that's cool. She said she knew time she was 5 that she's a she. So,
and that's the one consistent thing you hear so often, is that they knew since they were a little child what their gender was.
It's not like a pirate, Mr. Pirate person, who equated getting your leg cut off and putting on a wooden nub is the same as slowing
that's
puberty.
Such a straw man that I don't even see the relationship, but okay.
Yeah,
it's an amazing thing that they do there. I mean, at least in the sense of a transgendered person and a pirate. Okay,
that's a job.
Pirate is what you do. A trans person is what you are, and there's a damn big difference, kids.
Identity is not the same as a job.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the way that people intertwine the two sometimes, because that's the culture in which we live, but these people can't see their identity outside of their job.
Right. Oh, that's women's work, or that's men's work. And so it's kind of funny with that.
Yeah. And that job is classifies you not only by status but also by biological sex, apparently.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that I have heard that sort of thing, men's work, women's work, very recently here in this neighborhood. And it's like, oh Lord, how far into the past are you?
I just want to lay on the floor and thrash sometimes
Mhm.
when I'm just like, wow. And just sit there, take a deep breath, and go, must not be ugly on the Twitter.
And then, of course,
Where else are you going to be ugly at, you know?
Yeah,
there's one
I
thing about
guess.
there's what you are and what you do. And unfortunately, when I was going through gender counseling, a lot of it focused on what you do. And I wished that it could have focused elsewhere. You know, it's like, okay, what did you like to do? And of course, I liked embroidery. I liked cooking. Well, hey, guys, Wolfgang Puck likes cooking, but identifies very strongly as a man.
Yeah.
Does anybody remember
Gordon Ramsay. Oh my God, Gordon Ramsay.
Does anybody remember Rosie Greer, who would bash heads on the football field and sit on the bench and do needlepoint? Okay,
Yeah.
those things that are traditionally female oriented do not make you a woman. But then the other thing, though, what do you have?
I think it's okay.
To ask somebody what.
So from a like having read stuff, research in psychology and brain stuff, one of the things that you know you'll see sometimes that somebody like Jordan Peterson might mention. And by the way, if you don't know Jordan, everybody know. Do you know Jordan Peterson?
I wish I didn't.
I'm familiar. I avoid things he says because I just
right.
I don't want to shave my head to keep from pulling out my hair. So.
But he'll say, well, there's studies that say that spatial reasoning, like people like doing space stuff, localization, spatial reasoning, knowing where point A to point B is better in men than females. But I'm like, okay, so take a what we identify as a traditionally feminine task, like needlepoint. What the heck are you doing? You're using spatial reasoning skills, right, to determine where these little X's need to go. If you cross stitch, for instance, to make a huge mosaic, and that's a huge part of spatial reasoning that people don't even think about when they think of spatial reasoning. I just think that's fascinating, by the way.
Oh my gosh. I'm going to take a moment to say to Sir Marvin Manister, I think Manistar. He says, I cook very well and I am male. Hell, I work in a store deli. Go make me a sandwich. I bet you make great sandwiches. I would love to eat one of your sandwiches someday. I don't mean that as a sexist thing, but I've had somebody tell me to go make a sandwich, not too long ago. But there you go, Sir Marvin. Thank you. Now go make me a sandwich, dear.
Hey, Mel, I'll make you a heart sandwich. Does that sound good?
Oh, sure. That sounds nice. Except I don't eat organ meats because they gross me out.
I was raised in an Eastern European household. We ate anything.
That was funny.
But I was introduced to offal, Offal, which offal in a soup, and it was awful, AWFUL. I don't eat intestines or hearts or livers. I can't do it, man. Some things are just grody to me.
Tell you a story about preparing kidneys sometime.
Preparing kidneys for what? An influx of lots of sugar and salt?
To make kidneys for food, to serve for dinner.
I'll eat kidney beans, but I don't know about. I know what kidneys do.
Eat kidney beans because they look too much like kidneys.
Kidneys filter out your pee, man. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing. Is to prepare them for dinner. You literally have to boil the piss out of them because they're still full of urea when you get them.
Yes, I bet they are.
If you remember your chemistry.
Yeah. I mean, okay, think about this. Human. I know what will be delicious. What filters out urine?
Mm-hmm.
Well, people drink that and pour it in their eyeballs now. So,
that decided we should eat kidneys. You know what I mean? Or Like who was that person that's like, oh, this will be delicious.
At least I guess that, if you're really hungry and it's like a very, very, cold, cold winter and you manage to kill a thing, I guess maybe they're like, oh, this kidney stinks, but we really need to eat now. I could
Yeah.
completely understand eating it in that regard, but I don't have that problem right now. So I'm not entirely interested in eating kidneys or brains or tongue or heart or liver or Rocky Mountain oysters, which are bull testicles. Thank you. What was that? Was the John Candy film that I learned that about. So,
I
oh
can't
my
even
gosh.
eat normal oysters.
I
The
like
thing
normal
is,
oysters, but I can't imagine eating bull testicles.
oh heck, I'll do
One
it
of
at
those
least
things again
once.
that somebody's like, oh, you know what will be delicious? Testicles.
Let's just, we're completely neutering this bull. He's past his prime. We just gonna rip him right off. And sometimes people do it with their teeth. Like, have you seen how?
Yes, I've seen
Oh
that.
God, it was the Dirty Jobs episode. They were like castrating horses. Was it horses or goats? Just it just with their teeth.
Yeah,
Why? There are tools for this.
They teeth are effective and less painful, I guess.
I guess it's traditional, etc. And as you say, maybe less painful.
Oh.
Yeah, it's. I don't know that I would want to do that.
We have strayed very far from the topic to the point of eating testicles. And we were talking initially about having them. So
This is what happens when I'm on the panel, so keep that in mind in
Listen,
future.
the audience comes for the scientific discussion, but they stay for the testicle discussion.
they stay for the biting off the testicles discussion and eating them
Right.
later. So I'm so glad I had
man.
dinner well before this. Amanda, I'm sorry.
Oh my, no, okay, Jilly is coming up in the side chat now.
Oh boy. Okay, hold on. Casey. Somebody said Casey had a question. Let's scroll back and see if I can find it really quickly. Okay, I'm not finding it right off. Oh, Sir Marvin Manister has a sub bar. That sounds nice. Boar heads, bran meat, and cheese. Boy, that's the fancy stuff. I see that at the airports when I travel. I can't find Casey's question. So, Casey, if you had a question, ask it again because I'm scrolling through the chat and I can't find it. Pretty much with Mel about organ meats. Oh my gosh. Mincemeat pie. Not a fan. Not a fan.
Okay, wait, Jen, talk about partners versus identity. Could you clarify a little bit? I'm trying to figure out what you mean there.
Okay, so you mean like sexual preference versus identity?
That's the first thing I'm thinking of. Yeah,
That's-
I mean,
that's what
if
I'm
that's
thinking.
if that's what you've got in mind.
Okay, sexual preference. I actually did a show on human sexuality and all the different types of sexuality there are. It is a spectrum as well. So sexual preference is completely different from gender identity.
Yes,
So maybe one thing, like coming back to the topic a bit, that parents get afraid of. This might have happened with your parents, Diana. Is that they think if you change gender, then that means you're gay. Or
oh my,
you know,
I've got a funny story about
so
that. Finish up what you're
that's
doing.
that's absolutely not the case, because what makes your little heart flutter has nothing to do with your gender identity whatsoever, because if it did, we probably wouldn't have gay people.
Right, right.
It would be like the automatic thing there, and it's not like that at all. The things that help dictate your sexual preference, there's a lot of science that's kind of leaning towards what happens prenatal. Different things get turned on and off as a baby develops. Now, this was only studied with homosexual males. It wasn't studied with homosexual females. And those individuals who were cis male but homosexual, standard male but homosexual, who wasn't trans or anything like that. So Lots of different factors play a role in sexual preference development, but that's completely different from how you
Right.
identify
Hi,
as a
Maddie.
person.
And a lot of people don't know this. Many much people do not know that they're completely different. God, I remember one day I used to be in a sort of a mental health program where you would go to this place in groups and that sort of thing. And now, for some reason, the staff would treat me as one of them, which was
Mm.
not the greatest thing in the world to do. But you got a chance to talk with these people one on one. And one of the enforced recreation things that they did, that took us out somewhere, and one of the staff and I were standing outside just talking amongst ourselves, and a rather comely young lady walked by on the sidewalk. Now, the staff person knew I was trans, okay? And here's this young lady, and I'm talking to this guy, and my eyes are following the young lady, and he's looking at me and saying, "No, wait a minute. You went from boy to girl, so you're supposed to like guys now, right?" And no, it ain't don't work that way. Um, yeah, and Jen, your attraction to women, is that dependent upon your having gone through puberty as a male? I am saying not necessarily. In my own case, um, I'm attracted to women prior to transition and post transition. Most of us retain our sexual
Mm.
preference, partner preference,
I didn't know that.
through transition, or at least most that I know. Now, there are some that maintain that they changed preference, and I can't get inside their heads, and I can't know if that's the case or if they simply want it to be the case. But the one thing I did find out was one about 10 years ago. I kind of found out that I wasn't quite as lesbian as I wanted to be. I actually fell for a guy.
Oh
Uh,
my goodness. You're not a super lesbian, Diana. Shame on you.
yeah, I know. I can't have that.
Gosh.
I can't have that tight top with the S and the cape and the whole bit. Uh,
Man.
that shook me up.
Hmm.
It really did. But I
Well,
guess
maybe
with
you're
that,
pansexual, maybe, or, maybe you're bi. I mean, I don't know. But your
yeah, I don't know either.
sexuality, not, I mean, gender tends to not change so much. But your sexuality absolutely can change. So you might be attracted to a particular gender at the beginning, but it can change over time. And some people could be sexually active and then be like, yeah, I don't really want sex anymore. And be like, I don't want it. Asexual is a thing. Romantic is a thing. Romantic asexual, where you can fall in love with somebody but not want to have sex with them. And then you've got pansexual, where gender is not even an issue. And so you just fall in love with whomever you fall in love. So you may not
Hmm.
have a particular type. So and see, that can change. Sexuality, we've seen, can change, but it's not a choice. So you
Oh,
just
right, right.
you just
What?
tend to evolve. You're ever evolving and changing. Gender, that tends to stick. When you think this is who I am, is far different to who am I interested in. That can change, but the gender tends to stay. Either you're gender non-conforming, gender fluid, woman,
Yeah.
man. You
I'm
usually
still
find your
working.
your niche.
I'm still working to understand gender fluidity. I
Hmm.
admit that I don't quite get it. Now, of course, I'm accepting of it, absolutely. But
Right.
my I grew up in an era that was more binary
Hmm.
than the
Hmm.
current day, and
Right.
I even think of myself in binary terms. So, looking at somebody who is gender fluid and wondering what goes through their mind, no, I'm at a loss totally.
Hmm.
But I'm willing to learn, guys. Somebody wants to tell
Yeah.
me about it.
I
Well,
I think
Maddie and I were talking.
it's like the mounds in almond joy. Sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't.
Yeah,
So you're less like, you know, I've still got my chocolatey goodness going on with my coconut, and sometimes I have a little nut, and sometimes I just don't have one. So I'm just like, yeah, this is me today. Okay, yeah, that is not me today. So
does
Yeah,
it, is
Maddie and I were talking about this
yeah,
on last week's Coffee with Lavender. If anyone wants to
check it out.
watch that and get in on that discussion that we had,
That's cool.
um, very, very informative.
Well, I think Amanda, you wanted to hop in.
Yeah, so you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, or if I'm wrong in my like line of thinking, but gender fluidity seems to be more situational. Is that the case? For instance, like if I need to be more masculine in this situation, this is not going to be how my behavior manifests. But if I need to be more feminine here, then I'm going to be more feminine. Is that the case? Because it doesn't necessarily, it's not dependent upon sexual preference, right?
Oh,
Or
no.
preference. It's completely dependent upon the preference of the individual. I'm not gender fluid myself, so I have no idea if it's more situational or not.
Well, I don't know that it's situational. I'm just doing a quick search really, 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 really fast. One example is like Ruby Rose from Orange is the New Black. She's gender fluid, so sometimes she's more masculine, sometimes she's more feminine. They don't subscribe to the binary system.
Mm-hmm.
So I really would like to dig more into that. There's gender fluid, gender queer, non-binary. So it's not just male or female, man or woman. From what I'm just really doing a quick thing. It can change every day. Like today I feel a bit more masculine than I do feminine. Today I feel more feminine. And maybe today I'll wear makeup. Today, I'm really not interested in that at all. I'm just going to throw on my suit, walk outside. So I don't know if it's situational so much as it's just literally how they feel that day.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of it is expression and how much of it is identity. If you can draw a distinction between the two, where okay, I love dresses, I really do, but I can't get there. I'm not often in situations where a dress is appropriate. So okay, usually my dress is more what you see now, a pair of jeans and a polo shirt, that sort of thing. So I will express that way, but I'm still the same old Diana Clarion, going on inside. So I don't know how much of that is going on.
Right. Yeah, so I think that's still a relatively new type of area because we're learning so much more about gender. So I think the more that we have science dig into it, the better off we'll be, so where we can understand a bit better what's going on. We're coming up on an hour and a half, guys.
I'm telling you, we get into some good discussion and there's all sorts of fun.
There really is.
Thing I like, Mel, about these discussions that you and I had. I mean, I've been on the program for a lot lately. It's areas where it's kind of like, I don't know what's going on, but I'd love to look into that. And where there's a space where we can actually say, I don't know, and ask questions. And because I feel like a lot of these, and I'm glad your audience is receptive to that as well, because sometimes when you don't have the answers, people get upset with you.
Burn the witch.
Aren't you supposed to?
Burn the witch.
It's because I don't know everything in the world, guys. Come on.
I don't, and I know with you do a lot of brain stuff, and so you're like all about the brain. But see, the brain is the least understood organ in the body, and so just trying to go through and explaining a particular thing, and then somebody throws a question at you, you're like, wow, science hasn't gone down that road yet, but they might have. Let me double check. And
there's a huge field of brain research too that you're like, I don't know. I haven't read that literature. I don't read everything there is out there. A lot.
It is a lot.
And there's sometimes I don't know if it's been looked at yet. But sometimes it leads me in a great, interesting direction. at the same time. But transgender and transsexuality has definitely been looked at. And it's been very consistent with the findings too, which is pretty remarkable for brain research, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Well, any last thoughts, Amanda, before we kind of wrap this up? I want to thank you and Diana again for being on the show. This has been
Thank you for having
amazing.
me.
So it was really nice to get like a well-rounded view of, a person who's experienced the transgender childhood and what that's like. And then we have Amanda, our neuroscientist, who pops on here from time to time and talks about her brain stuff. Please do check out her channel. She does lots of amazing brain videos on brief brain facts. The link is in the description. Do check out Diana's channel as well. It's always lovely. Her videos are just so much fun, and it's really nice to dive into those conversations. So, last thoughts, Amanda, before we wrap this up.
First off, if you aren't already subscribed to my channel, please go subscribe to my channel because I'm almost to 1,000 subscribers. And so that would be really nice to reach that milestone. But last thoughts on this particular topic is that I'm hoping that our society will finally get around to where kind of the research is. It seems like the research is in the public domain for a long time and people just don't know. I mean, you mentioned Lavender, you mentioned that it was since 1995 was the initial study. And so these findings have been known to at least the scientific community about differences in the brain of trans people that mimic their identified gender. And so it would seem as if this needs to come around to society at this point so that society stops penalizing these people and persecuting these people for being who they are. And it's a shame that our society does that. I don't think it's anybody's business, how you live your life, as long as you're not hurting somebody else or yourself, but they're creating a hostile environment for people. And it does cause a societal grief, which ends up resulting in people's suicides, right? And that's a societal problem at that point. So any way that you can prevent that type of activity, the better. And so we just need to be cognizant of how we treat others. That's my thoughts.
Lovely thoughts.
Yay.
Diana, any final thoughts for this?
Yeah, my thoughts are basically I would like to see, I don't know if I'll see it in my lifetime, but I would like to see that residual resentment, fear, unacceptance, whatever you want to call it, just sort of go away. And I know it's going to take time, that sort of thing. For the kind of problems that I'll have, and I do have problems with that even now. I mean, people don't mind talking to me. People don't mind having me as a friend, that sort of thing. I wonder about their taste, but it's another story. But when it comes to dating, there are still a great number of people who will simply not consider me because I'm a trans woman. Now, is that transphobia? Is that preference? I don't know. But it would be really nice were there a little less of that, because I'm not the only one who runs into a problem with that. And maybe someday, if we're not special, if we're just plain old people, I'm thinking it might be a lot better.
Yeah, see people as human beings, not so much as, oh, you're this person, this thing that has the stigma. But, we're all humans, right? We're doing the best we can.
Hope so.
We're all humans, hairless apes on a spinning rock that goes around the sun. And this is all we got. We're all we got that we know of. So maybe we should be kinder to one another.
You're right. Life is too short to be persecuting other people.
Yeah.
That not only causes distress to whatever community you're persecuting, but also to the persecutors themselves. To also be in that state of hostility, to have to do that, that's distressing. So just knock it off.
Just, kindness is free, and it goes a long way, particularly with individuals who have depression and anxiety.
Yep.
in the trans community, high suicide rate. So let's wrap this up. Thank you, Amanda, for being on my show again. And if ever you want me on your show, man, I know I've been on there once. Shoot me a message. I'll hop over anytime. I don't mind at all. And Diana, thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, danke schön for having me on.
I'm so glad you guys could be here. And so, like, share, subscribe to their shows. They're absolutely amazing. They're very knowledgeable, and it's always a joy to watch their videos. Okay. Objectively Subjective says, I'm sure Essence of Thought or I could come on sometime to discuss gender fluidity. Let's make that happen.
Hey, that sounds great.
That'd be great. So, you guys, I'm so excited that you're here. Thank you for being here with us. And Saturday, I will be talking about the science of love. And then next Saturday, junk food addiction.
Ooh.
Shouldn't that be on like the same thing, the love of junk food? So, thank you again. You guys have an awesome night. I'm going to show my patron video, and then we're going to sign off. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks a lot, troops. See you on the other side.